So let's get started, y'all, because I want to make sure we have enough time with Sydnye and Huna. For those coming in, please feel free to drop your name, your pronouns, where you're from, and we're gonna get started with the conversation because we've been waiting for this moment for a long time, y'all, right?
Yes.
So my name is Jamie Swift. I use she, her pronouns. I am the executive director of Black Radicals, and simply, if you're not familiar with Black Radicals or BWR, we are a Black feminist advocacy organization dedicated to uplifting and centering the power and possibilities of Black women and gender expansive activists from around the world. So yeah, thank y'all so much for rocking with us. We are just so happy to do this kind of work. So super excited for this convo on Black diaspora feminisms in Australia, right? And to have the amazing Sydnye and Huna together in conversation and dialogue, right? And so first things first, before we get started, like I always do with Black Men Radicals events, I just want to share that this is a safe space, right? We do not allow any homophobia, queerphobia, transphobia, ableism, fat phobia, white supremacy, misogynoir, you name it, I don't accept it, and it will not be allowed on this platform. So please respect the space and our amazing guests. And also, too, let's honor the land that we're on, right? And I'm based in Piscataway land, otherwise known as Washington, D.C., but let's honor Indigenous communities wherever we are, but also honor enslaved African peoples who toiled this land and who built this nation as well. And so let's keep that in mind and always have that at the forefront. So before we get started, I have to do our guests properly because I don't play, y'all. Okay, we gotta introduce our guests properly because that's just not right. So I'm like really excited to have this conversation. So I'm gonna introduce Huna Amweero, is a Black, she, her, is a Black Arab screenwriter and radio producer in so-called Australia, sovereignty never ceded. While she has worked in commercial radio and other predominantly white stations, Huna prefers to speak on her work at Radio Skid Row 88.9 FM, a community radio station with a nearly 40-year history of radical broadcasting. Building on the station's legacy of centering the most marginalized, Huna's focus at Radio Skid Row has been creating jobs, training programs, and bridging Skid Row's history into the digital space. She is the current president of Radio Skid Row's board and hosts a weekly radio show on Sunday at 10 a.m. called Where We At, which spotlights Black Diaspora perspectives and community building in Sydney, Australia. As a screenwriter, Huna's work aims to unravel oppression while embracing the fictional freedom of allowing marginalized characters to play out their imperfections on screen. Her first feature, Blaze, Causeway Films, co-written with visual artist Del Catherine Barton, is currently in post-production. Woo woo. Huna's nonfiction writing was recently published in the book Arab, Australian, Other, Pac Macmillan 2019. As a screenwriter, Huna is represented by Cameron's Management. So shout out to you, Huna. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for reading that bio that embarrasses me. Don't like talking about myself.
I know. Thank you. It's hard, but we got to do you right. And we got to do Sydnye Allen right too.
Yes.
I left a bunch of stuff off. I totally forgot to like add all these details, but that's all right. Y'all can look me up later.
Yeah, you can look up Dr. Sydnye Allen later, definitely. So Dr. Sydnye Allen is an African-American writer who uses the pronouns she, her. She lives in Sydney, Australia, and works as a creative writer and audio maker. Sydnye is an early childhood and tertiary educator. She co-hosts a weekly show called Where We At with Huna on Radio Skid Row 88.9 FM. So thank you all so much for being here. This is super exciting.
Thank you. This is so exciting. We're huge fans of Black Women Radicals. You can see I've got the winter fit on because it's winter here. I also have a summer t-shirt. And we're huge fans of your work, and it's a big thing that I've brought, as I said, it says in the bio, like bringing out history into the digital space has been part of my work here. So I definitely use Black Women Radicals as a teaching tool and an inspo tool for everyone here, and how we can talk more nuanced and in-depth about these histories that aren't online and shouldn't be forgotten or erased.
Yeah,
so
I appreciate that. This makes me feel crunchy or embarrassed. My cheeks are probably turning red. But no, this conversation is super exciting because and we'll just jump into the first question, because a lot of times when people think of Australia, it's such like a tourist attraction. People are, like, we were talking about Crocodile Dundee and like, you know, kangaroos, and that is like the aesthetic of Australia, right? But we know that First Nation communities were here first, or there first, excuse me, and there's also Black Diaspora communities. So the first question is, why is it important to honor First Nation communities or First Nations peoples in Australia, especially doing the work that y'all do?
Yeah, so to start on our end, we want to acknowledge that we're coming to you from the studios at Radio Skid Row, which is on unceded Gadigal land, nation of Eora, and sovereignty was never ceded here, and this is Black land that we're on. We're settlers on this land, but Radio Skid Row is a station for marginalized people. So we share the space with First Nations Black people. It's really important to honor that from the start, and also to honor the voices and labor of Black Indigenous people that has gone into sustaining this platform, 88.9, over 40 years, so we can be here and talk about this stuff. And it's especially important to always honor that, to always think about that, not just at the start of an event, but in your daily life and practice, because those people, Black people, sustained this land for over 80,000 years. We're talking about one of the most ancient civilizations in the world, and it was colonized by the British in 1788. And also in that colonization, there was a Black person on that boat, that fleet that came. And I guess that's some of the place that we talk about and come from, is as settlers, as how do we see ourselves in relation to Black Indigenous people here, and how does white supremacy, you know, place us in relation to that? You know, what privileges are we given in order to continue the oppression of Black First Nations people on this land, to continue genocide? So I was raised very much with those, an understanding of that, a knowledge of that, and that you must always acknowledge and recognize that. And, you know, I guess, to be honest, like, we were going to have a First Nations voice with us today, but was unable to pan out. And, you know, that's hard in some ways, because we can't speak for them. But I just hope, you know, everyone listening out there, you know, I want to acknowledge the First Nations people listening. I hope we're able to start a dialogue that doesn't erase their presence here, doesn't erase their knowledge, their labor, their culture, the violence that they've been subjected to, and that is still ongoing. So those are the First Nations Black people. Diaspora people, well, I'm a Black Arab. My family originates from what is now known as Lebanon and now known as Namibia. But yeah, Sydney is a settler as an African American. And that's just the start of the layers of complexity of what goes on down here. It's not ruse. There was people here and they were Black.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Sydney, thank you so much for that, Huna, because that contextualizes the conversation. I think that's like the foregrounding, the acknowledgement, because like Australia is a unique place when we talk about race and racialization and things of that nature. And I think that more people should know about that, those outside of Australia, because it's not always as simple as this group here and this group here, right? And I thank you for contextualizing that. And Sydney, I wanted to give you the opportunity too to say something to that as well. And also, well, the follow-up would be kind of like the genealogy of both of you, in terms of, like, I know you mentioned it, Huna, in the beginning, but like how like your family genealogy in Australia, and like what brought you to Australia generally. Yeah.
Sure. So yes, I do live on Gadigal and Wongo land as a settler who is Black, African American ancestry. And what brought me here is a job at a university, funnily enough. I work in early childhood education, and one of my friends who graduated from the same doctoral program I did at the University of Texas had already moved to Australia in 2006 and had been sending me job advertisements for years trying to get me to move here. And after I finished my PhD, I moved to Chicago for 2 years to work on some projects there, Head Start, and this pilot project for an early childhood intervention that was supposed to increase high school graduation rates in the community of Chicago Heights over a generation. So it brought me here, and I didn't come to Sydney, Australia. When I moved here, I actually moved to a community called Albury Wodonga, which is down on Wiradjuri land. It's at the bottom southern border of Wiradjuri country. And that is where I first became American in on Wiradjuri country, because I found out that I was American because in America, I'm Black. Yes. I'm African American. When I got to Australia and I lived in Albury Wodonga, I found out I was American. And that was my introduction to this Black privilege that I have living on stolen land here. It was the first time that happened. And it's been 10 years now of growth and learning what it means to live as an African-American settler on this land, because it does carry privilege. And it's something that means I have a responsibility to speak up when there is injustice. I have a responsibility to call attention to our privilege here. And I say that to all my African-Americans and my other European, Black people who come settle down on this stolen land, that we have a responsibility to speak on the injustices that are happening on this stolen land. This year is the 30th anniversary of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. 30 years ago, this report was put out there. Freedom fighters put in years of work. They did years of labor to bring justice that has not been delivered 30 years later. So that is one reason why we have a responsibility to work in solidarity, and we do need to know about what is happening to Indigenous people on this stolen land.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for contextualizing that as well. And I understood being American when my studies in Brazil, and I was like, oh, I'm an American. Oh, okay.
Right, right.
Take that. I never identified as that. So thank you so much for sharing that too. And the follow-up, like I said, is like kind of like, Huna, I'm interested in you said your family's from Lebanon and Namibia.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your like family's genealogy, but also to talk about the ways in which First Nation and also Black diaspora communities are like actively erased by Australia, because like I said, most of like the aesthetic is that there's just white folks, and you do not see, or at least I didn't see in the propaganda, like Black and Indigenous communities represented. So do you mind speaking to that as well? And then Sydnye, I'll get your follow-up too.
Okay, so I guess the best place to start is always, it's part of where we at, is where are you from? And so on my mother's side, as I said, we originate from what is now known as Lebanon. My mother's father, his father came here grandfather came here in 1898, so about 100 years into colonization. So my grandfather was actually born on this land. My mother's mother, came here in 1925 as a 6-month-old, and they settled in inner city Redfern, which is, what is historically known as a Black area, obviously Gadigal land. They came here to build an Orthodox church. So we're a descendant from Orthodox priests. We originally come from the northern part of Lebanon. It wasn't known as that when they left, and these are early waves of migration to this land, right? The dominant narrative is that Lebanese people came after the war. That's the dominant narrative of my family. Don't necessarily fit into that. We've lost language. We don't speak Arabic by the time I was born in 88. My father was born in what is known as Namibia now. at the time of his birth, West South Africa, living under apartheid. We are Kwambi people, right from the north of Namibia, that I've come to find out. 14 generations on that land, known as Oshakati. Now, my father came here in the late 70s and early 80s. Again, an early wave of migration. And this is something that a lot of people don't know, but they came here because, or they might know now that they've watched the new season of The Crown, but Australia at that time was anti-apartheid. This is ignoring the fact that South Africans came to this land to see how they were oppressing Black people to further perfect the system that we know as apartheid, that my family was living under. My dad acquired papers, but was able to get asylum here. And the way that it's told to me is those often many students, this is after Soweto uprising, they were picked up from the airport by the government in limousines and taken to the bank to open bank accounts. They weren't given any mental health support, which, you know, after living under a white supremacist system and violence, you need, but they were given these things. And you can start to see how that is about distinguishing us from Indigenous people, right? And the point of that at the time, really the root of that aim, it was a liberal government, what is known as a right-wing party in our country. And they were supporting these young Black activists to fight against apartheid. Why? Because we wanted a higher standing in the Commonwealth. We were, as a colony, even though it was white settlement and a white supremacist project, we were still, you know, like all them other countries that the Queen rules over. And they're like, well, no, we want respect. And so in order to disrupt that British and Australian relationship, they were anti-apartheid, you know, and they let these people come here, and that's how my father came here. And then they met, and I was born on Gadigal land, right? And I was raised in a radical community environment. I was raised in the environment of Skid Row, and I was raised around a lot of different Black people. I'm talking First Nations Black people from different parts of this land, right? Because there is hundreds of clans, tribes, language groups, right? So Black people from all over this land, but also Black people from the Caribbean, all over the continent, South America. There's melanated people all around, like the actual space of Australia, right? In the islands around, melanated people everywhere. But everyone was Black. We were just all had different heritages. And a lot of people were two different kinds of Black, right? First Nations, African American, First Nations and Haitian, First Nations and from the continent. Like, we were all Black, but we also understood that we were on Black land where a genocide had happened for us to be here as well. And that's kind of the structure and genealogy I was raised in. I have a very assimilated Arab family that came here early. And yeah, and like, as I said, it's with this country, we tend to, you know, a group is an ethnic group, a racial group is defined by, you know, the most latest group to come here, right? So Chinese people have been here for hundreds of years as well, have been part of this, you know, land as well. But if you look in the media, or if, you know, people say, oh, Chinese people are international students and they're the people that come here and study, and they're rich Chinese people. And it's like, no, some Chinese people have families that go back here generations. They have married with, you know, they have indigenous blood maybe in them or something like that. And it's the same with Africans, right? We're Sudanese refugees now. There's no conception that people even came before the 90s, you know, or didn't, you know, or that even Australia would have supported something like Black people coming to this country. So that's where I fit in it. And that's maybe why sometimes I do feel erased, because it's like I fall into a gap when I was at university and struggling, or when I'm at film projects, people are like, why didn't you go for Indigenous funding? And it's like, I'm not Indigenous. My people didn't fight for that. That is a space that is for those people to tell those stories. And they're like, oh, so what are you? Like, where do you go? And it's like, well, I go over here with the other settlers, or I go over here with my people, and we work in solidarity to stay away from you guys. But yeah, I do kind of fall into a gap. That isn't to say that my story is completely unique. There are other people like me, and that's tend to why I say Black Arab. I don't identify as Australian because that is illegal, right? The state of Australia is illegal, and there have always been Arabs that are Black, you know? It's like when I was young, they used to call me Cape to Cairo, and or quote that thing from Gil Scott-Heron where it's like Egypt and Libya used to be in Africa, but they've been moved to the Middle East. And I think my position in that, and being raised with all these different kinds of political thoughts and liberation movements, it's like, that's where when we sit down and talk with Sydnye and the question of America comes up, we get to have a really good conversation. Because, you know, obviously, so that's how I ended up where we at.
Yeah, and I hate to interrupt because I could listen to you speak all day in terms of like, because you don't see that, it's always like this and or, it's never, I mean, it's always like, you know, it can't be multiple things, it can't be multiple identities, or just how race and racialization work in Australia. It's like I said, the propaganda has always been Crocodile Dundee for me, from my point of view, Crocodile Dundee, kangaroos, tourists, you know, attractions, but there are Black, First Nation, and other multiracial groups in Australia. And I'm very interested too, and I want to move into like the second part, because I want to talk about, and in Sydnye, you can talk too, and I, of course, Huna, but like get your perspective. But one, how are these communities like erased, not only like globally in terms of like in media, but also in Australia? But I'm interested in both of y'all's like unique experiences combating like white supremacy, racism, and misogynoir, given your Black diaspora connections and identities living in Australia, because I think that's important to ground as well.
Yeah, can I do something really quickly? I just want to say hi to my baby. Hi, Aiden, he's watching.
Hey, friend.
I love it.
But yeah, this is really important. So as I said, going back to my time living on Wiradjuri country, I had some like harsh lessons in learning that the privilege I was going to be extended as an American, a Black person from what is now called America. I learned some harsh lessons because I worked with a lot of really racist people. I had people telling me the first day I arrived at work, and I was supervising a team of 15 white women from country Australia. And they were like, I've never talked to a Black person before. I've never met a Black person before. And I was like, I'm dumbfounded. So beyond having to realize, okay, so I'm literally carrying the weight of having to teach people who Black people are. And I'm like, I'm me representing Sydnye Allen from Houston, Texas. I'm not a Black person who can be a global Black voice. You don't even know what stolen land you're living on down there. And then you expect me to somehow deliver this, personification of Blackness. And I realized that I had to learn how to speak for myself, representing my position, and not dare try to ever take up space that is other people's land that I live on being stolen land, that I had to recognize and learn what that meant, because I didn't know. I showed up as an American, Crocodile Dundee, Steve Irwin, kangaroos, which now, I've learned that on Gadigal land, kangaroos called bunda. Like, no one used that word. That's a white colonizer word, but that's what everybody knows around the world. So I had to learn very quickly that if I didn't learn how to educate myself about what is happening with Indigenous people and living on stolen land, that I was going to be harming Black people. And I did, because from my ignorance, I made foolish decisions, in my work. I don't want to go into it, but I was almost going to disrupt a hard-earned relationship between the Wiradjuri Council of Elders and the university where I work, Charles Sturt University. I almost, through a decision to put up some artwork, completely destroyed all of these people's labor and work to create a workable partnership between the local council of elders and the university. And I was like, whoa, 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 obviously. And this is like 4 months into me living in Australia. So I was like, pump your brakes. Like, there's some stuff I don't know. There's some stuff I have to learn. And in the process and in the journey, I've just really had to tackle that privilege that I get as an American person living on this land. And it's a struggle. Like, internally, that is a serious struggle because I'm a Black person, raised Black, proud. But living here, we have to recognize no matter what your class is, in terms of your class in living on this stolen land, you have privilege as an American person. I have that privilege. And so just recognizing that building relationships with people who are doing the work, whose families have been doing the work, is key for me. Where I stand politically as a radical Black feminist, I have to learn how to build genuine partnerships with people who have been doing the work, not people who are just doing some social media posts and suddenly discovering they care about what's happening, but people who have been doing the work. So to me, that's been really important, is like slowly. And that's something I had to learn. Relationships are built very slowly here. You don't come in and say, hey, I want to do this project. Who do I talk to? Great, we're doing it on Monday. Years of slow work. That is what I've had to learn. It's years of slow work. People need to know they can trust you. And that doesn't happen overnight. You don't just walk in and hand people some money and say, now trust me, I'm about to create this thing for you. That's not how it works here. So I had to discover that you have to slowly learn who are the people I'm even supposed to be talking to. You can't talk to the first person who's loud, who just throws their hand up and says, I can tell you what to do. Wrong. And people don't know this. Like, I'm talking to people living on this stolen land. They do not know that. They do not know you can't just roll in somewhere and say, hey, is someone here Indigenous? Who can I talk to? I want to do this thing. Okay, great. This person said I can do it. That's not protocol. That's not protocol. So you have to learn the protocols of how you engage with community. You do not just decide you want to do a project and just roll in and do it because the first person who threw their hand up told you they give you authorization to do it. So that will cause harm to the people who are already suffering from all of these decades and hundreds of years of genocide on this country. So that's something that I had to learn very quickly, is you have to learn the local protocols of how you even engage with community. And that is years and years of work.
Yeah. But people are in the comments saying she's speaking the truth. Trust is important, right? And what I love about what you were saying about your journey is admitting that you don't have all the answers. I think for me as a Black feminist with a transnational lens and praxis, like, we have to acknowledge, like, we're not going to have all the answers, and we have to talk about our positionalities, because even doing work in Brazil, I realized, like, I had a lot of privilege, even though I come from a very marginalized background in the United States. I'm light skinned, right? I'm able to navigate the world differently and being a light skinned woman. I have a PhD. I'm like, it's all these different things, even though I'm not rich, definitely ain't rich, y'all. Okay. And like, I have suffered certain things. It's like when you go to different countries, for me, I'm an American first in Brazil, not a Black person. And it takes time to build relationships generally. So I'm so grateful that you said that. I mean, someone said it takes time to build rapport, build community, and establish trust. Yes. You can't just go into these other places where Black people are and pretend like there's this fictive kinship that we have. You're like, you ain't one of us. And it's jarring, it's difficult, but I thank you for saying that. And Huna, I'm interested in the ways you navigate misogynoir, white supremacy, given also the fact that your family has been in Australia for generations. I'm interested in your experience as well.
Well, as again, I would to say I was really lucky to grow up in the community that I did. from a very young age, like just instilled, I guess, a pride in being Black, right? I've always been Black, and a pride in being Black. Also that, you know, after my birth, apartheid ends, right? So as I grow up, I learn about anti-apartheid movements and solidarity here between Indigenous folks and the Africans that had come here to end that. And so I always had a real pride in being Black. I was lucky enough to, I said, grow up around a lot of Black people, navigating misogyny and white supremacy. As I've gotten older, I just, look, it's in the fabric of the colony, right? So yes, do I experience microaggressions and things like that? Yes. I guess after my period of studying uni, and I guess my last stint at a commercial white station, I guess, I just don't interact with white people that much. I work in spaces like Radio Skid Row, or I work with people that I can trust and know I can tell they're wrong and call out. I would say, like, my personal instances of racism and misogyny, of course, they're painful and they hurt, but they're just not my primary political concern right now, right? So my primary political concern is like basically land back and land rights and the sovereignty struggle here, and how I can do work that can support and uplift and sustain that. So part of being on Skid Row, or being the president of Skid Row, is like, okay, this platform was used years ago for activism, and it's going to be used decades in the future for activism. We have to sustain it, right? Or doing training programs and things like that. So like my personal instances of misogyny are, that's what they are. Sure, I'm upset, they hurt my feelings, I'm angry. I come talk to Sydnye about it while we play some music on air, right?
Because there's always some shit that happens during the week.
There's always some shit. But here on this land, like the center of the political conversation and fight is First Nations people, sovereignty, and just getting them the rights, acknowledgement, and reparations that they deserve. Like, we're continuing to rape and destroy their land, land that was never ceded, that was stolen from them. So that is my primary focus, the interpersonal. So like, I guess for people not here listening, yes, if you come here, they will be racist to you, right? White Australia policy, stolen generation, like these things are in the fabric of the nation, right? But as Sydnye says, there is a hierarchy, there are privileges where white supremacy positions us. You know, Sydnye is like, there's American, there's my kind of people, and then there's Indigenous people, like, because white people are awful everywhere. I think we can all agree with that, right? That colonization has happened everywhere. And so that's where I sit with that. I think, yes, you experience misogyny. Yes, you experience racism. Yes, I experience erasure, but nothing is going to stop me from being Black. Like, and, you know, again, even in relation to Sydnye, like, I can go back to Namibia, right? I can go back to Lebanon. It's a whole nother kind of privilege. It might have taken me 30 years to get back to Namibia, but I can go there now. Right? But I'm not, because the privilege in having all of that has come off the oppression of Black people. And so why would I want to participate in the oppression of Black people anywhere in the world? We're all complicit in this horrible colony, but I'm going to do everything I can to not be.
I would just say, to jump onto what Huna said, the practical things I do is limit my time in white spaces. I'm a bit older than Huna, and I've done my years where you put on the cloak or the armor or whatever, and you go into these white spaces, and because it was all assimilation for all of us, let's just get you in to where they are and then you'll be successful and then everything's solved. That's a lie. And then we learn that as adults, you have been indoctrinated. All of that internalized white supremacy, you have to do the work of undoing it. And for me, I literally get exhausted. If I have to go be in a space where I'm surrounded by white people and there's not one other Black person in sight who is aligned with me and we have each other to rely on, I'm exhausted. By the end of that day, I'm like, I can't do this tomorrow. So I can't take a full-time job where I'm going to be in a white space because I can't do it. It's the burden on my health. And I say that as someone, it's sacrifices, because financially, if I just go do this job and I don't even think about the impact on me, then of course I can get the money, but I limit my time there. We listen to Black music. We play Black music. We have our show because we're like, we have to give ourselves back what is taken out of us every day when we're out there in a white racist world, and a world that, beats us down with misogyny as well, because that's embedded into the fabric of this hierarchy of patriarchy, capitalism, misogyny on us as Black women. It just means we get that every single day that we walk out of the house. And I write about it a lot in my writing. A lot of my published writing, I write about the impact of that daily experience of racism and the microaggressions. I write about it so people can go away and think about it and they can share it with a friend and say, what does that feel like? But we really just limit our time as much as we possibly can. That's how we are learning how to navigate it now.
Yeah, I should, like, full disclosure, even though we're all Black radical feminists here, like, my partner's white and that's enough. Right? That's enough. He tricked me, I'm wearing love and all that shit. And 10 years later, I'm like, that's enough. Do you know what I mean? I predominantly work in spaces where I don't have to interact with white people. I'm not, we're not diversity darlings. Like, diversity here is...
You won't hear us using those labels that erase us from the narrative. You won't hear us using
people of color.
People. You will not. You won't hear us saying WOC, women of color, not from our mouths. You will not hear that, because we know that we are fighting, combating misogyny, combating structural oppression every single day. For people who get their solidarity in that space, by all means, do the work you're doing. Absolutely, keep doing the work you're doing. But for us, it is about talking about our lived experience as Black women.
And I think that honesty with oneself, like when you come to a point where I cannot do this anymore for my mental, physical, and emotional health and well-being, speaks volumes, because it takes time to get there. And then you do miss out on opportunities, financial or otherwise, because you have this politic where it's a politic of refusal, and you're refusing to be in spaces where you're constantly having to prove yourself twice or thrice as someone else, or you're supposed, like you said, Sydnye, supposed to speak for all Black folks around the world, or your talents or whatever it may be are overlooked because, oh, this is too radical, Huna, we can't talk about this. And then also we have to be honest with ourselves too. There are Black people who are co-opted and pacified and who refuse to speak up as well. So all that combination of things is just a whole lot. And I think the radical nature, the radicalness of saying no and being like, we are Black women and we're going to do this work whether you like it or not, to me is revolutionary, in that you're talking about radical Black feminisms or radical Black women's perspectives, right? And particularly in Australia, where like I said, the propaganda is that y'all are not there. Or that Black people are not there, right?
And that's that actually, again, to go back to the issue of sovereignty here never being ceded, it was, like parts of the continent, they said no one was here. It was claimed under terra nullius, which means no one was here. Okay. Black people, the Indigenous Black people of this land, were not recognized as human until 1967, right? And so I just don't see, my erasure is nothing compared to that. You know, I'm 32. My erasure is nothing compared to that. And that the propaganda of tourist paradise, you know, no. I'm sure some people would around the world would have seen the images of the fires, the land literally burning, right? That's because of colonization.
Yeah.
That's because of erasure of Indigenous knowledges, practices, sciences, like just basic respect for the land. And so, yeah, like, I think you know, I will never not call myself Black. I will never let myself be subsumed. And, you know, people of color must stick together. Mississippi Masala style, I won't do that. But I will always like pay respect and turn people's focus to that, right? And so, yeah, it is radical. It does make people feel sometimes like it's hard, especially when you're asking Black people. You're asking Black people to be quiet and listen to other Black people. You know, be quiet, you know? Yes, we know that we get overpoliced. Yes, we know our kids are in jail, but their kids are in jail first, right? Their kids have been in jail first. And so some people do think it's too much, the way we talk, or think I'm asking too much of them. But I'm okay. I'm learning to become okay with that. I get sad when Black people don't like me, but I get over it eventually because this is the primary concern.
Yeah. And I want to make sure, because like we're having such a great conversation, and I also want the audience to know that please, we're going to have a Q&A section. So portion, excuse me, of the conversation. So please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom to ask your questions. But I really do want to talk about the importance of where we at. I feel like not just talking about like Black diaspora, you know, perspectives or Black diaspora perspectives, but also in like your friendship as well, and your sisterhood and siblinghood and like these, you know, varying experiences. So like, what was the genesis of where we at, and how did it get started? Because I'm interested in that too.
It started.
How deep do you want to go?
Well, we'll do a brief legacy. We'll do a brief legacy of our time slot on Radio Skid Row.
So in some ways, I started on this time slot when I was like 5 years old. So my mom did this time slot when I was a kid. My mom was also a station manager here at Skid Row. I don't know if she would call herself one of the founders, but I am going to call her one of the founders of Skid Row, Nicola Joseph. So she did this time slot when I was a kid. She was a single mom, so she used to bring me in on Sunday mornings. And by the time I was about 5, I could panel. She would also interview me on her show sometimes about my experiences as a Black kid on stolen land. I remember once I was suspended from school. The same week me and an Indigenous Black boy were suspended from school. And she had me on to talk about what had happened because it was an incident involving a racist teacher. And so she had me on air to talk about what happened. So I guess from a really young age, I learned that radio was really powerful. As a child, full disclosure, I hated Skid Row. I saw it as something that took a lot of my mom's time and energy, and I did not understand why. Like, I was like, let it close. Who cares if Skid Row shuts down? Last year, I nearly killed myself keeping Skid Row open during the pandemic. Yeah, so it's like, it's an interesting thing, but that's sort of when it started. Sydnye came to Skid Row because I was on staff and I was approached by a Somali woman born on this land. So similar to me from the continent, but Somali on this land. Parents come in the same wave as my father. And she said she wanted to do a show with her, British Black Nigerian woman, and an African American woman. And I was like, this is it. I'd been doing a lot towards building up Indigenous broadcasting at the station while I was on staff. But when they came in, I'm like, okay, we can have Indigenous conversations, then we can start to pull up our own folk through this, and diaspora folk, because everyone's covered. You know, all the problem areas, you know, can be acknowledged. And that was a tough show, right? To navigate all of that. That was a tough show. And those women in Sydney did an amazing job. But when they moved on, Sydney still wanted to do radio. And I actually was leaving staff because I wanted to plot to get on the board and become president and do a little coup. And I thought a great way of doing that also would be to be back on air and be a presenter, like be back down there with the volunteers. And so we started doing the show together.
Yeah, and what I would love to say about Radio Skid Row as well is, for anyone who doesn't know about the active work that happens from this radio station, throughout the year, there are programs where young people from community are brought in to do training, actual training. I did the training. I completed a certificate in screen and media production to learn how to produce audio. And that was all run through grant funding from the radio station. So myself and other presenters, Indigenous presenters, other presenters participated in that. And I felt quite confident and prepared to learn how to use radio as a tool, like all of the different techniques we need to learn, how to do a broadcast, how to record, how to panel, how to create your own content. And that's a credit to this radio station that for as long as it's been in existence, it's been training people, Black people, Indigenous people, people who come from refugee backgrounds to get the skills they need to create radio. So as Huna said, that she realized as a young person, radio had power. There was power in radio. So we really stand by that. And I'm so proud that I've been on air here for 3 years now. And really grateful that, you know, Huna's mother bringing her in this legacy. Her mom taught me. She was one of my teachers here when I trained at Radio Skid Row. And I think the power of this radio station is that it is truly here to invest in the community so they can create their own content and be self-sustaining in the future.
And I think where we at specifically is a response to just like giving us the chance to have some space to discuss this stuff.
2 hours out of the week.
Yeah, look, it's 2 hours. It's not a lot, but it's longer than a tweet, right?
Absolutely.
It's longer than a TikTok. And we can actually start to, you know, we can give voice to what we're going through. We can tie it back to what happens on this land. Sydney can give perspective about her, you know, how it might influence her growing up. I can come in with, you know, my Black Arab ass and be like, hang on, that's American imperialism. Let's pull that back and talk about how this works, and just let the complexity kind of just bubble and marinate and, you know, all those good things, because it's complex, it's layered. It won't be solved in this Zoom conversation. It's not going to be solved in one where we at, but the time carved out for it is important. And the other thing you have to know about this colony is our press is dominated by white people, right? Rupert Murdoch, Mr. Burns, you know, that's our guy, right? Our papers, it's propaganda top to bottom, right? This is a frequency. People can turn on their radio and hear us talk, right? It is accessible, right? For us and for our listeners. And that is what is important to me. Like, you know, we have presenters that don't have the internet at home. So, you know, they're not going to meme their way out of white supremacy. The radio is necessary. During the fires, right? Wi-Fi was down. The radio is necessary. And so I find there is a really powerful communion in asking people to take that active choice, to turn on the radio at 10 a.m. on a Sunday and listen to two Black women talk.
We fought over, you want to talk about our relationship and our dynamic. When I say we fought over getting anything online, Huna didn't want anything online. She did not want to record our shows and put them on SoundCloud. And so we were forced into it during the lockdown because the radio station was locked down for months and months. And we made some really powerful content during that time. I had to fight with her to get it on, but people have listened to it. People have learned some stuff. People have learned to follow and engage with other content as a result of going to that space to listen to content we made. Hours and hours and hours of labor to do a 2-hour show during lockdown.
It was terrible. But part of the reason why I didn't want it online is because I believe, you know, online is partly surveillance, right? And so people are going to listen, and, you know, it's very easy. Everyone want to be Skid Row, but no one want to be at Skid Row. So you put stuff online and then it pops up on other stations that don't want to do the work for 40 years. So fine.
We know y'all are
that
doing
was one
that,
of it.
by
But
the
part
way.
of the reason I conceded is because Sydney, right, as an African American woman away from her home during COVID and the civil rights movement, like there had to be the ability for her to connect with her community during that time and have that exchange. And that's what Where We At is about. It's like, this is where we at right now. This is what we're giving you. Because we're all over the world experiencing this thing called white supremacy, but also living out generations of resilience and resistance. And so that's why in the end I conceded. And we do have, I think what's great about our relationship is, like, not that we call each other out, but, you know, it's like, nah, come on, and push, you know, and
because
really
we
push.
need critical conversations. These are like our hallway chats with other people. We need critical conversations so we can move forward in all domains, in our arts, in our political spaces, in our institutions. If we can't have critical dialogue between community, amongst ourselves, we cannot get where we say we're trying to go.
Not at all. And how do you grow? How do you have generative conversations? How do you build like for my case, a Black transnational feminist praxis? Like, how do you decolonize yourself? And I love that about what y'all are doing. And it's hard, right? Like, growing in your praxis is hard. And I don't want anyone to like have this belief that like standing in your values is easy. It's not, especially when everyone else wants you to just like shut up and be quiet. But what I love about Where We At and like the work that y'all continue to do is like it is accessible, right? And like oftentimes, you know, Sydnye, in academia, knowledge is inaccessible, and it's only for those.
Yeah, it's in a tight little box, and if you don't have the special key, you can't get into it.
Yeah, and then also, Huna, you know about in white supremacist media, it's only a certain, you know, like you said when we were talking, how many like Black folks and Indigenous Black peoples in Australia, they're criminalized. That's when you see them in the media, right? And so y'all are like pushing back against that, and that's what I love about Where We At. Someone asked like, what's the name of the show? It's Where We At. I dropped the link to follow on Instagram. Please follow and support Where We At. And just, y'all need to listen to Black women. We be telling y'all. Okay.
Listen to Black women. Exactly. Exactly.
And there's so much, like, you know, if you follow Where We At, but also Radio Skid Row, there is so much content made by all different kinds of Black people. Like we said, after us is Africa Connections. That program's been running for 25 years. It is a Pan-African or global African program, but with again, political intentions. Always has had political intentions. And they come up after us. We just have, well, last year we had a whole day of Indigenous programming that ran through pandemic out of our Black Fridays programming, which was inspired by the original Radio Redfern conception. So shout out to OG Radio Redfern and the people that came up with the idea that not only did Indigenous people need to be able to use radio as a platform, but they needed time in the station where no other people came in, right? So that was the rule back then, before they had their own space outside of the main studio, that on Thursdays, no non-Indigenous people could enter the station. Only Indigenous people. And that was what was only going to be on air. And that's something that I'm really still working towards, to get right in how to establish it and sustain it in a way that really serves community and that is free from bureaucracy. Because that's what happened last year, is we had our funding cut. And look, again, if seeing as Sydnye was upfront, I'm going to be totally upfront. It's not lost on me that I spent the better part of a year fighting with white funding bodies about what they did and making sure Skid Row could stay open. And at the end of that year, what had suffered was our Indigenous programming, right? It wasn't only that, but it shows me that in cutting Skid Row's funding, white supremacy was able to distract me from the work that for the past 4 years had been my primary concern. So there are a lot of voices, you know, here in this, on this land, but not just us on Skid Row. There is so much to learn.
Our sister station down in Melbourne,
yeah,
3CR, has amazing programs throughout the week. We absolutely partner with them. Huna's done an interview this week as a part of their radiothon. So that is certainly another community radio station who you can rely on information from. You can trust them for your news that's local and global.
And intersectional.
Yes.
Right, because this is the other thing, like we're not even getting really into queerness and how that it plays out, our disability, mental health. Like to be Indigenous, disabled, or with mental health issues in this country, and what that experience is like, and the way that the carceral system is used to manage that. Is disturbing and disgusting. You know, you'll hear about people in solitary confinement. It's just disgusting. It's really like, and that's the other thing, you've always got to think about this land, the colonization of this land. It was a penal colony, right? Then the white people sent these white people here because they didn't really want them no more, but also they had to do the work of building something here. And then they had to, you know, kill all the Black people. And so some of these criminals were the leaders. You know, it's like, and so policing and carceral, just like the carceral system, is a huge part of managing all types of difference in this country. So you have huge 100% rates of Indigenous incarceration in some states. 100% of the
juvenile justice system.
In juvenile justice, 100% of people incarcerated are Indigenous people. We don't even know how many people from the diaspora would be incarcerated, because and shout out to a regional on this, African stats are messed up because of white South Africans. So we don't know how many Black people are in jail, have died in jail, have died at the hands of the police. So when we refer to the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, each week on our show, we read from the report from the 300 recommendations. One, to remind people that each week you got to do some work, right? 2, that work has been done 30 years ago and ignored. But 3, like me as a Black settler, we don't have that work. We don't have that research, those stats. We know our kids are in jail, but we don't have numbers, reports, commissions. And I'm not sure we ever can because of white South Africans. Because they love white South Africans here. That's the other thing.
Oh yeah, please don't leave this out of
I'm not going to leave this out, but if you come here and you meet a white South African, even any kind of South African, you got to ask them when they came. You got to.
I remember you
saying. Because so many people packed up those diamonds, packed up that cash, left that farm to come to this farm.
But before that, they came to Australia. The Dutch colonizers in South Africa came to Australia to study with the Australian government their mission system of how they jailed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on these stolen lands, learned their system, and went back to implement a system of apartheid. So please, guys, gals, people, everybody out there, you need to know that. You need to know that.
Another one would be that I think is really important for African Americans or Black Americans, cotton farming. We have American cotton farms here. You know, I know Indigenous people who have told me their story about how their families worked as unpaid labor on cotton farms and were sprayed with pesticides. And we're talking in the 50s, 60s, 70s that the cotton farming came here. Do you think that's in correlation to when it stopped happening over there? And, you know, it's these things about how the colonizers link up.
They do.
And make sure they can sustain their practices by moving them around. We have American defense bases here and always have. You know, there's a generation of people that thought they were Black Indigenous and then found out they were born by African American soldiers. You know, and it's that erasure too, that personal, that the point of white supremacy, and with things like the stolen generation here, where they took children, both not just light children to assimilate them, but other children to put them in as domestic workers and slaves, right? Like that. And people
are still debating whether there was ever slavery on this stolen land. To this day, they challenge people publicly in the media and say there was never. The prime minister said months ago, last year, there was never slavery on this land. So
this is horrible.
Yeah.
This is the type of, and I'm glad we're having this conversation, and thank you for folks that are like tuning in, because this is a lesson for me, right? When I first reached out, actually, Huna, I think you were wearing a Black Radicals sweatshirt, and I was like, oh, there's a radical radio station in Sydney. Why didn't I know about this? And it actually gives me like goosebumps, and I feel angry at the fact that many of us do not know this information. And it's because of global white supremacy. And it's because it's literally white supremacy wanting to think that we are the minority when we are really the majority, and not seeing these like critical linkages of colonialism, of imperialism, of racism, of slavery. And I thank y'all for highlighting this, because people need to know this. And I think people are thirsty and wanting to learn this. And this goes into my next question too, because we're at 9:04 and I want to make sure we answer any questions that we may have.
Absolutely.
And I just want to really read a few comments that people made. So Toivo in the comments said, in Southern Africa, those of us in certain wings of Black consciousness tradition do not call them white South Africans, excuse me. They are white settlers, if not Europeans outright.
Yes. And I'm referring specifically to the ones that fled before apartheid ended. I think you can't, a boer is a boer.
Yeah. And
sorry, I get it, but you're totally right about that. Yeah, settlers, colonizers.
Yeah, and then forgive me if I'm saying your name incorrectly, but Machipo, thank you for highlighting the white South African issue, and I'm an African South African. And then they also said, I'm always confronted by the ignorance that is exposed when white people ask me excitedly if I can speak Dutch language.
I get that. I get that too. And I get that. People ask me if I grew up speaking Afrikaans at home.
There's my aunt. Hi, Auntie.
Auntie Iris, yay!
My Aunt Iris was on our Juneteenth show last year. Yeah. Shout out to my auntie. And we know we just had Juneteenth last week, so we don't want to forget to talk about Juneteenth being critical in who I am as a person who's from Texas. That anybody who doesn't know what Juneteenth is, it was 2.5 years after slavery was ended by Abraham Lincoln with the Emancipation Proclamation. It wasn't until June 19th, 1865, that slaves in Texas found out they were free. So that is what we were celebrating. So I was extra hot last week when people were just, all appropriation last week pissed me off, because I was like, my people didn't get freedom until 2.5 years after slavery ended in America. So hi, Auntie.
Yes. And that is an interesting aspect, I think, of our show, in that, like, we obviously on this land, because of global media, consume a lot of American media, right? But also, like, as a Black person, obviously globally you consume different kinds of Black media. But having Sydney's perspective on that show is really important, because it's about, often she's talking about, this is the global exploitation of African American people. And even me, I have to check myself in how I consume African American culture, because it isn't just Black culture, right? I am not descendant from slaves of that land, right? In the same way, I'm not descendant of Indigenous people who have been subject to genocide and colonization on this land. So why wouldn't I extend that same respect to all Black people, all Black cultures globally? just because America, has decided to let this level of Black person be exported globally, right? We have Snoop Dogg on our, Deliveroo,
I don't know
what do you call it? Uber Eats
advertised.
ads.
Samuel L. Jackson.
And it says at the bottom, paid actor. Yeah, it says paid actor, like, because a white person's going to watch it and think Snoop Dogg's going to bring you your food, right? Right here.
Samuel L. Jackson is selling gambling in Australia.
And it's interesting because also too, there's a certain type of aesthetic of Black people that's being, and when you talk about Snoop Dogg, I mean, he's rich. I mean, you talk about Samuel Jackson,
that's what I mean.
He's rich, and so
rich Black men.
Yeah, and what about, and also like, a lot of stereotypes that are exported in the diaspora as well about certain groups, but and that, yeah, it's like all these. It's amazing with white supremacy. I don't want to give credit to white supremacy because it's white supremacy, but it's amazing how you can go to all these different places where Black people are. And it's like, oh, I had this perception of you. Like when I went to Brazil, the only thing I could muster up as an image was Gisele Bündchen, the German Brazilian model when I was growing up, who used to model for Victoria's Secret, right? Like that's the only image I could conjure because that's all I know. Not knowing that Brazil houses the largest Black population in the African diaspora, second behind
outside of the continent. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's amazing that we're having these discussions and like to literally decolonize our way of thinking really quickly, because I really want to ask.
Yes, there's so much to talk about, by the way.
We're gonna have to do a part two, y'all. We're gonna have to do a part two. But really quickly, it's been a thread throughout the whole entire conversation, but what does solidarity mean to you? Just like have a, what does that mean to be in solidarity? Yeah.
Okay, so in its simplest, I guess, most political form, the way I try to tell people is not replicating the violence of colonization in the way you move on this land, right? We are all complicit as settlers in the sustaining of the colony. White supremacy in this context has positioned us where it's positioned us in relation to Indigenous people is not in solidarity, right? It's about, who is Blacker than who and all this stuff, right? For me, it's about not replicating the experience of colonization through things that you do, right? It is also a practice of deep listening and being quiet. So that is something that I've always been taught, both in Skid Row, like pretty much in Skid Row, is you need to know when to be quiet and listen.
Yes.
Yeah. And deeply listen. Like Black people have to deeply listen and then go away and think about how they sit in relation to that. Right. That's our work to do. And that's the way I try to define it. And I think I've had a lot of people when I've questioned people's solidarity, they're like, what do you want us to do? And it's like, very simply, not replicate the violence of colonization. Don't invalidate and erase the sovereignty struggle of this land by simply talking about civil rights. Because by just saying we want more rights, we want more representation in the media, us as non-Indigenous Black people, if we're saying that, that lets the white supremacist colony off the hook of giving land back, right? If we give you your rights and, all of that, well, then maybe we get to keep the land. No, you stole the land and you're continuing to desecrate it. So it can't just be about civil rights, about representation, that kind of progress. It has to be centered on the struggle for land and sovereignty. And I see that as beneficial to not just this continent, but the continent that my people are on, right? Because in Namibia, same thing, foreign mining companies, things like that are happening here, extraction of the land. And I think that's what you have to think about, colonization and white supremacy as a global project of extracting resources from Black land, including the labor of Black people, right? And the lives of Black people. So that's what solidarity is to me personally. Yeah, it has to be that big macro political solidarity.
I feel like I personally had a lot of deep reflection after the world, experienced the ripple of protest after we watched George Floyd be murdered on camera. After everybody in the world watched that, and some people, it was their first time being willing to acknowledge that the violence, the killing, the modern day genocide happening to Black people in America was actually happening. So some people decided that was the moment they wanted to actually acknowledge a problem. So what I have to say about solidarity based on that is that we immediately questioned. I said, how long is this George Floyd effect, and rest in power to George Floyd? How long is the George Floyd effect going to impact people? Because there were so many people who decided they were going to use the moment, the death of George Floyd, to highlight their own issues, to say, George Floyd was killed. What about my people? George Floyd was killed. Follow me. And that is not solidarity. That is not solidarity. You do not use someone else's fight for justice as your opportunistic moment to stand on your own soapbox. That is not solidarity. So a lot of people are doing that. I was somewhere last week and saw that happen and was so pissed off because we were at this powerful experience, this powerful moment of someone truth telling. And then someone else decided they were going to put their hand up and be like, and what about this? That is not solidarity. So for me, you need to know, as Huna already said, when it is time for you to just shut up, sit down and deeply listen. That is really what it is about. You have to know when you, as a person who may not be a white person, you're not a Black person, or maybe you are a Black person, but this is not your time. It's not about your civil rights struggle. It's not about your moment. If Black women are talking, sit down, listen to them. And also we have this conversation too about, is solidarity about the daily life, your daily life decisions, or is it about your politics? So, and we were on different sides of that, of the argument, but we arrived at, it has to be both. It has to be how you live your daily life. What are you doing to combat white supremacy, misogynoir, racism, structural oppression? How are you participating in it? How are we as settlers participating in violence being done to Indigenous people? We have to know that in our daily lives. And then politically, where are you aligned politically?
Yeah, because this is my thing right now. I'm like, and then Sydney thinks I'm crazy because I'm like, if you're Black, what is the point of being Black and not radical? And because this is the thing, she's like, you do it in your personal life. And I'm like, yeah, but that's like saying, like, if I was like, okay, I could talk about your solidarity in my life and what I've seen over the course of my life, but really it sounds like I'm saying, well, my best friend was Indigenous and my friend's mom was Indigenous, and my best friend was Black. This is interpersonal stuff, and yes, you do have to move with respect every single day, but if you're not talking about liberation and the advancement of Black people and stopping the death of Black children, what's the point?
Yeah,
that's for me personally right now. And so this is the thing we've been going back and forth over the last week about. And Sydney's like, just you're 5% of the radical, just stay in the 5% is cool. But I'm like, what's the point?
I just let her know where we sit. I'm like, we're in the 5%, everybody else is somewhere in 95. So we can't expect that 95 to suddenly jump behind us and be like, we're with them. We just have to know what we're doing is talking to people who are in the 95%, because we're right here. Obviously, some of the people listening right now, watching us right now, are in this space, but some of the people are not. And we have to recognize that it's going to take them a long time, if ever, to be able to move their feet out from where they are in their positionality to somewhere else.
And this is why the show is called Where We At, because it's not just how you ended up here, but it's like, where are we at politically, really? And globally, where are we at? Because that's my thing. It's like, there are Black liberation movements worldwide throughout history that we can all learn from to combat this global white supremacy.
So many questions.
There is a lot of questions.
I know. I was about to say, we have a lot of questions, but first and foremost,
we haven't even done shout outs yet either. We haven't.
I know. But first and foremost, before we get into the questions, and I just want to say, that we're not able to get to all the questions. So please do not feel some sort of way if we don't ask your questions. Yes. But two, I just want to say thank you so much for a generative, refreshing, and enlightening conversation, because I'm sitting here thinking like, now is the time for me to learn more about First Nation peoples and also Black diaspora communities in Australia, because that strengthens my solidarity with you, right? And that's the goal. And that is a solidarity with other people around the world. So I really, really appreciate that. And also someone mentioned Guido, forgive me if I'm saying your name incorrectly.
Yeah, hi Guido.
I heard about the macro a lot today, but what about the micro? What is their own individual experience in Australia? Huna and Sydnye touched a lot on that today, but this was only an hour and a half conversation, y'all. We're gonna have a, if y'all want to, a follow-up conversation.
Yeah. And there's so many people I want to introduce you to and unpack. Like this is, you know, like, as I said, you know, I was worried that we didn't have a First Nations voice with us, but one, it's fine for us to do some of this labor, especially globally, if we're, you know, not being right and respectful with each other, right, and at points or on different platforms, but also like it's just the tip of the iceberg. And that I've always believed growing up here globally that First Nations Black people here and the way Blackness, well, white supremacy manages Blackness on this land and the way they have resisted that has much of a contribution to the global conversation about what it means to be Black. Then, you know, as valid as in the same way we all consume American civil rights and those liberation movements, that what has happened here is really important, especially in how it continues and sustains the colony now. Yeah,
definitely. And quickly, Toivo had a question, but I also want to like kind of contextualize the question because it's so talking about like what the past 20 years of First Nation people's resistance look like, and that's like a big question. But I'm also interested to complement Toivo's question is, and like for more people to do their own research. Can you name any like particularly First Nation like activists, organizers, educators, scholars that people can research and dig more into their work so that we can have a better understanding of the plight, the struggle, and the activism?
Yes. Okay, I can do this. There's lots, obviously, and Google helps. I would also just say to people globally who want to research, Black people here also use the term Black as in BLAK to differentiate from being Black descendant from the African continent, right? So you can search via BLAK to find quite radical things on different social media platforms. The stuff that I would point out as things to look at, stuff from Radio Skid Row, right? And there's a show called Survival Guide that I think is really great in tracing colonization to now, or looking at gentrification as just ongoing colonization. I would also point to the work of Barbara McGrady, who is a photographer, who I think captures First Nations experience in a way that you might never have seen globally exported. I think if people have seen images of Black Indigenous people, they might have been from what is known as remote area or more isolated parts of the nation. Whereas Barbara McGrady, I think, captures a urban experience from the position of an activist, right? So she's very much been there, not just in cultural life, but in political life. And as someone that I look to as just, I don't know, she's just always been very open and supportive. Like even when I can't get in to see, you know, an African-American artist, she'll bring me as her guest because the white people won't let me in, but maybe she's gotten in. She's just a legend, Barbara McGrady. I would also say the work of Aileen Morton Robinson.
Yep. Talking up to the white woman, if you want to start with that piece of literature from her.
And my mom's also been hassling me to read The White Possessive. That is someone, if we're talking women whose work, but also like community radio. And that's something I always want to advocate for, as well as Black people. Community radio around this country, you know, has Black people of all different types on it. And so I really would say, like, another thing to do, I know everyone is academic, but music, right? So the story, like, Indigenous people have been telling stories through music and art for centuries. And I think all of us could talk about how we've learned about liberation through music, either through the music of Fela Kuti, Hugh Masekela, hip hop, you know, from wherever it's from. And I think you can look, I know streaming services have stuff as well, but there's a community radio station, 4AAA in Queensland, Murray Country, and they do a countdown on invasion, the day that marks invasion, that is a really comprehensive list of Indigenous music and storytelling where you can learn some of this stuff, right? Then you also want to look into land rights movements. And it's interesting, I read a story this morning where a community had been given land rights, and I thought this was really interesting. They were handed the native, what is called the native title. So the piece of paper that says that they were there originally, to create a space to support tourism. Now this is in the Northern Territory. So again, like, these are images people might have seen of Indigenous communities. But I was like, okay, but how does that work if you're not placed in that community? Or where, you know, land back is what we're going for, but what does this land back mean? So I haven't had enough time to look into it, but land rights, and that, and obviously there's a documentary that you mentioned seeing called Black Panther Woman, as well, that talks a little bit about the Black Panther Party here, and you can see the correlations between those movements. And yeah, the rest is Google. We do encourage people to do their own work on our show. We try not to spoon feed everything to everyone, because you have to find your own way to it and work out how you sit in relation to this. So that's where I'm going to say Skid Row, community radio, Barbara McGrady. Oh, and also we also always want to shout out a young academic called Kaya Abawaji, who I think is doing amazing work in actually making what we've talked about today a bit more coherent. So exploring the generational and ancestral relationships between people from both, Black people from both continents, and what our relationships might have been like in the past.
It's interesting you mentioned Kaya, because another friend of mine who is actually Black woman from Australia mentioned Kaya's name. And I was like, this is kismet, right? And also too, in the chat, look at all these great resources people are putting in the chat. This is so important, because we all need this information to really build our praxis, right? So thank you all for putting this information in. And I hope that, and I don't want to be too presumptuous, but if, you know, Sydnye and Huna, if we could build a reading list for folks, that Black Radicals often does, because people are so thirsty for this knowledge. These suggestions are such a great starting point, and I really thank you for that. And I also, we have 4 minutes. I just want to really quickly, I just want to read a few comments really quickly, and then I'm going to answer, like, you know, ask another question. So Nicola said, thank you for this discussion. Thank you, Nicola, for being here.
Is that my mom?
Probably.
Or is it Nicola?
Nicola Joseph.
I don't know. I can't see. I don't know if it's my mom. Hi.
Hi. Oh my goodness. And your auntie?
Oh, it is my mom. It is my mom. Thanks, Mom. I please read her thesis when it comes out. I know she's not Black, but she made me, so Jesus.
That's all that matters, right? Like, that's your mom. And then, you know, your auntie Iris Sydnye was here. That's so amazing.
Tuevo, I wanted to say Tuevo is from the same region that you're from. He's
no
same
way.
people. He
You're
said that earlier.
North.
You weren't looking at the comments, but I didn't want to interrupt you. But Tuevo, your people.
Yeah, Toivo said, I would love to connect with y'all more in the future. I'm a part of a collective called the Black Radical. We're new and just getting started, but the idea is to build a global Black radical network.
Yes.
Connect with and build with grassroots Black people globally. Toivo, please, if you feel comfortable, send your email, drop us your email.
There was something else also I wanted to say about, resource sharing, learning, if you're about to start this journey, right? We consume, and this is specifically, I guess, if you're African American, right? We consume your culture, right? I give Beyonce a lot of my money. I know that doesn't go to you specifically or help towards your liberation, but there are Black people here with businesses too, and in First Nations people as well. And so no matter your interest, like Black people doing stuff all over the world. And so you can also support other Black economies that are growing, that are trying to build outside of white supremacy. So if you're looking for something and want it to be sent all the way from here, you can still get some mad stuff. So I was going to say that too, that economically and financially, Black people in the global North, if you have resources, we can distribute to other Black people globally as well to support that.
Thank you for sharing that. Because we are 1 minute. I don't want to I respect y'all's time, but I really want to end off. One thing Marcella said, they asked for, can you make comments? And I think they were talking about making comments and suggestions about, learning more. I am from Brazil. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much, Marcelo, for being here from Brazil. But Meredith asked, and I think this is great to have this intergenerational question. I'm much older than you three and so much reflection at my stage of life. Thank you all for your passion and values. I wonder, as I look at the world with less years ahead of me than you three, what is my generation leaving? It feels frankly an awful state. Are you three optimistic about things getting better for the generations you will pass work onto? It breaks my heart to think of young people not looking forward to a better future.
We are in some crazy times politically. I mean, look at what's happening with all the voting rights laws in America. So many programs are being defunded on this stolen land. It is a sad time. So thank you so much for that, deeply reflective question, because I have a 3-year-old son and it terrifies me often where we are with the undoing of all of the labor of our ancestors, of our own people fighting for the rights that we take for granted, and that those may not exist for our children. It's unfathomable, really, that is happening actively, because white supremacy refuses to go down without fighting and dragging us all into our graves. So that is a fight. We literally are fighting for the rights that were already fought for, because the people are trying to actively take those away from us. So we really don't have, and this is where I'm with Huna, with the, if you're not radical, what are you doing? Because we won't even have what we have right now. So our children certainly won't have those freedoms if we're not fighting for them right now. And so for me, I'm very diligent and deliberate about the way I surround my son with images of strength and power, and really make sure I show him that the way to the future is to be deeply knowledgeable about yourself and your people. And I think so many of us were fed the opposite. We were fed through our compulsory educations, the opposite. Nobody taught us about who our people were. Nobody taught us about the land we were on. And that is, for me as a parent, something that is important for my child, but also for everyone else's child, for all the other children out there. And I'm hopeful in that I know I'm fighting for my son and the other children. So that makes me hopeful, because I know I'm not going to throw him into a white supremacist education and leave him there to fend for himself.
I've been thinking about this a lot too. I think as Black people all over the world, if we've been subject to colonization or some kind of violence, our life expectancies are shorter, right? And so we feel like, what is the time we have to change things? And I think after last year, when we did see not a fizzle out and not a backlash, but just a toning down of that initial surge of Black Lives Matter in June, I thought, I sat down with Barbara McGrady and I did an interview with her to talk about what her year in COVID was like. And I said, do you think things are changing? And she She said to me, I have seen things change and things happen in my lifetime that I never thought I would see. Right? Yes, all these terrible things are still happening, but she has seen things in her lifetime that she never thought she would be possible for Black people. Growing up as a First Nations Black woman on this land, right? And so I had to really, I have a dream that one day Black people will turn around and be able to say to me, go back to where you came from. This is our land, go back to where you came from. And I get to, go off into the Namibian sunset or have ice cream in my grandmother's village in Lebanon. That's the dream. I might not get there. I'm dedicating my life to radical politics. I don't got a lot of money in the bank. I might not get there, but that's okay. Like, we still have to fight for the change. We might not see it in our lifetime, but we still have to fight. And so that's where my depressed ass has come to. It is worth it, even if you don't see the change, but we will see changes in our lifetime that we've never seen. Just this week, they changed the name of a cheese, right? There's a cheese you can buy. Sydnye must have tripped when she came here and saw.
I did actually.
The cheese, I'm going to say what explicitly, right? Trigger warning. The cheese was called coon.
Coon cheese. I did.
My whole life, we all been going into the supermarket and there's the cheese product. This week, they started rolling out their new name. It's called Cheer. Coon is gone forever. Never thought I would see that in my lifetime. Now it's not what I'm talking, it's not land rights, right? But we still have to fight. So, and on multiple fronts. This is what my mom says. White supremacy must be fought on multiple fronts. So while I might feel like a conversation is small cheese, small change, not where I'm concerned, it still has to happen, right? And then I'm over here doing this and you're over there doing that. And it just forms like Voltron. And
Derek Chauvin's 22.5 years is a drop in the ocean of justice. One drop in the ocean of what we need to see the change and live the change. We're not free until we're all free. One drop of justice.
Yeah, and I would say today with that conviction news of that land, on this land, there's no one ever been convicted for a death in custody. No one. And we're in 400, upwards of 400 people dying since the truth-telling exercise that was supposed to stop people dying in custody. So it is global. This is global. Black people be everywhere. White supremacy is everywhere. But I do believe we can do it. I might not see it in my time. The woman, thank you for asking that amazing question. You might not see it, but that does not mean we shouldn't do the work towards it.
And I will say that, I mean, Sydnye, I don't have children, but it's fearful to think about that. And Huna, like, we do have to constantly push every day. And I think like one of these this conversation is a part of something that we probably would have never had it, right? If it wasn't for this horrible pandemic that has ravaged people's lives, right? And I'm not going to make light of that, but I'm grateful that we are able to have a conversation and be connected in this way, because that is something I've never seen before in terms of these, like in my life, and like these diasporic connections, and knowing that there's Black people everywhere. We are here and always have been, but feeling like, wow, like I'm missing something, a part of my life, like my education. And then when you learn about it, it's like, wow.
So we're all missing things, like I said, I didn't get to go to Namibia till I was in my 30s because my dad can't bring himself to take me there, right? Sydnye,
I've never been any of my lands. I'm from so many different ones: Nigeria, Mali, Togo, Benin, Ghana, Senegal, Cameroon, Congo. I don't even know where to start. I got to go all Central West Africa.
And I was born into this station and this politics, and at 30 years old and as president, I'm hearing stories for the first time. Or I'm hearing stories that I was told half of, and now I get to hear the end of. And I am learning so much about where we're at in solidarity and how we really need to do the work to make it genuine. Oh, I can't believe one thing I forgot to shout out. This is what I actually thought was one of the best examples of global or solidarity here was Angela Davis and the work she does with Sisters Inside, right? So, and she's been known to come multiple times and draw a crowd, stand up and hand the mic to Sisters Inside to talk about the work they do to stop the incarceration of First Nations women. That's solidarity, right? That's a global project of liberation. And so that's definitely Sisters Inside and Angela Davis. And Angela, you know, Angela Davis came here to Radio Skid Row, you know, and there are Black people that have come to this country and come to Skid Row and fought for Skid Row or gone to Black communities and made sure they're there on the streets and people can come to the shows. That happens less now. So, you know, that's something else too, that when you come here, make sure you rock with the community. The same way you would want us to do if we came to you. It's very simple, right? We know how we want to be treated as Black people. We all know how we want to be respected. And it's extending that respect to each other and knowing exactly where you are. Because Sydney and I always say, if you're Black and on land that isn't yours, you're special. But if that's your land, right, that all these people are colonizing, you're the oppressed person. You're marginalized more than anyone. And so, yeah, I think that's what we've learned from talking with each other and being on this land, is that it's about respect and talking to each other and listening to each other and giving up the fight.
Yeah. Well, I will
thank you. Thank you so much for all your work. I wear your t-shirts around and sweater around the station because, you know, I am young and Black and I'm supposed to be in charge and people look at me crazy. And so I wear your shirts like armor so people know what they're getting when I walk in the room.
Well, I appreciate that, because when I saw you wearing it, I was like, oh my gosh, wow, really? But I want to say thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for everyone being here. And like, this is like a takeaway is like, where are y'all at with your solidarity? Where are y'all at with addressing white supremacy and combating it? And where are y'all at in decolonizing what you learned through this unfortunate white supremacist racist structure, right? And so this conversation will be uploaded to YouTube, and just really follow Radio Skid Row and where we at, support Huna and Sydney. And just thank y'all for being here and supporting the work of Black Women Radicals. This is what we want to do to make these type of conversations accessible. So we can learn and grow and build with one another. So I thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Have a good morning.
And have a good
night.
Yes, night for you.
It's 9:40 here, so it's what, 10:40 there?
11:40.
Yeah, we were having time, y'all, trying to organize this. Like, I know. Yeah, but we did it.
I actually think there's like people yelling at the station door.
Jamie, thank you so much for taking your academy with you and bringing it to everybody out there. So thank you so much for doing that, because that's a hard-earned education from you that you're bringing to everybody who doesn't have the privilege of attending a university to get all of that knowledge.
Dr. Jamie Smith, everyone.
Dr. Jamie Smith.
Congratulations.
Oh, Lord, no, don't talk about it. Thank y'all so much. And hopefully we get to do a round 2. So I would love it.
Yes, and thanks to everyone that joined and listened and contributed. We hope we can have this ongoing conversation in an ongoing way. And yeah, there's a space here to do that. So yes.
Definitely. Yes. Someone really everybody. Amazing. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.